Chapter 6. The Call to Colors. I well knew what twists and turns were in store at this point. The world's only consulting detective had involved himself in two matters, not unusually, for at times he had as many as a dozen cases that he handled simultaneously. His calling out the reserves, as it were, merely signified that one or both ranked as a major challenge, and I had seen the sheaf of cables that Billy had dispatched 2 nights before. The harvest they produced had to be reaped. Returning to our chambers was a signal for Holmes to depart after reading messages that had been delivered in our absence. In olden times I had chafed at being suddenly out of things. But I now realized that this was standard procedure in certain of Holmes's investigations. The cables had been dispatched to that ragtag army that his brother had referred to. Some Holmes met elsewhere, like Portlock the informer, formerly connected with Moriarty, of infamous memory. I had never seen the man, and Porlock was not his real name. But Holmes used him along with others, whom I did know, some well. They fell into two camps, this heterogeneous crew that came with strange backgrounds and unusual specialized talents. The outside group were seldom spoken of. On rare occasions, an unidentified person of either sex might make a surreptitious visit to Baker Street because of the exigencies of a situation. I took pains not to make note of their features, and, as much as possible, to wipe them from my mind's slate, lest an unwitting slip of the tongue would cause harm. The inside group were known by name to Billy, Mrs. Hudson, and myself. They appeared at our chambers frequently, and on most occasions I was privy to their conferences with the master sleuth. I pictured my friend, possibly in one of the many disguises he used so well, now involved with the outside group. Certainly he would be loosening his hounds on the scent of Chu San Fu, and the memory of the Chinese criminal caused me to spend part of the dying day oiling my trusty Weebly and checking its load. Holmes had a seeming disregard for his personal safety, which I tried to counterbalance by being as prepared as I could. When nightfall came, I ate a solitary meal and tried to cushion Mrs. Hudson's concern about the eating habits of her famous tenant. The nutritive needs of the detective were one of the many worries of the dear lady, and revealed her extreme patience. When Holmes disappeared, one never would know when he would return, and when he did, he would like, as not decide, to have a bite, which might range from a nibble of cheese to half a joint of beef. When frustrated by a case, and on the premises, he frequently sat brooding at the table, his meal untouched, and our landlady's wheedling was to no avail. But if Holmes had a problem, Mrs. Hudson had some cause to feel pride in her skill with the stove and skillet. Even in those early days when I was still recovering from my wartime wounds and subsequent illness, I had been blessed with a good appetite and consistently did justice to her provender. The dishes had been cleared away, and, possibly spurred by our trip to the Macewood stud, I had made some check marks against entries in the Southgate plate, due to be run over the weekend. Our news dealer, who delivered copies of all editions, included a bi-weekly racing sheet that I fancied. I had narrowed my choice to "Vortex out of Grand Dame" by Nornia when there were footsteps on the stairs. Before I could arise, Holmes opened the door, and slim Gilligan, a valise in one hand, followed him in. The former master cracksman was our most frequent visitor from the inside group. His lock-and-key establishment, originally financed by Sherlock Holmes, was a successful business venture. Small wonder, since his workmen, mostly graduates of Dartmoor or Princetown, were skilful indeed. Installing a lock on a front door or making a new key for a file case was child's play to one who has opened a Miss Stroffner safe in the dead of the night by the light of a bull's-eye lantern. It was bruited about in certain circles that Holmes was a silent partner in Gilligan's business, which must have acted as a deterrent should any of the employees consider resuming their wayward paths. Holmes favored me with a quick nod as he crossed to the desk. Unlocking the cash drawer, Gilligan, his cloth hat at a jaunty angle and an unlit cigarette stuck behind one ear, winked in my direction. His expression indicated, "We're at it again." "There's an inn in the village, Slim," my friend was saying, "and I'm sure you can work out a good cow story." "A breeze, Gov," was the abnormally thin man's response. Holmes removed some currency from the desk, placed it in an envelope, and handed it to Gilligan. "A cable here will reach me or Watson. If not, Billy will find us. I don't know of any other problems save those we have discussed. How about Styles?" "Oh no," I thought. Slippery Styles, the human shadows involved. "He is at Waterloo waiting for me. You'll have your cable, Gov, in jig time." With a cheerful wave in my direction, the cracksman was gone. I did not hear the downstairs door open or close, but when Slim came or went, I never did. He just seemed to materialize like a genie at Holmes's call and then vanish. For a time I had thought that by night he came and went via the roof. Gilligan was a great fancier of rooftops. Of late it had crossed my mind that he might know about the house next door and the secret entrance to our establishment. I refrained from bringing this matter up. If Holmes wanted me to know, he would tell me. One of my friend's catchphrases was, "I tell as much or as little as I choose." Usually he modified this somewhat cavalier statement with the additive, "That is the advantage of being unofficial." The years had taught me that this was an elastic phrase, meaning that he alone possessed carte blanche. In truth, he had on occasion chosen to appoint himself as the prosecution, judge, and jury as well, but no harm had come of it. During my musings, Holmes had gotten his pipe going, and now saw fit to break his silence. "Any, any visitors, Watson?" None, nor messages either. No matter. Followed by a trail of smoke, he began to pace our sitting room with that purposeful manner. Holmes was tall and amazingly strong, the best amateur boxer I had ever seen. As a result, his movements were graceful and his footfall light. Had it not been so, I imagine there would have been paths worn in our carpets, for he did like to think on his feet. I imagine that his mind, so capable of absolute concentration, was completely immersed in the deed's matter and whatever errand he had sent Gilligan to do. Slim's mention of Waterloo had led me to associate the cracksman with the Macewood affair. As usual, Holmes surprised me. I agree with your selection, Watson. Vortex should win the plate with ease. There must have been exasperation on my face as I followed his moving figure. My racing sheet was on the end table, though how he spotted it and my pencil work I could not fathom. Look here, Holmes. I checked at least four of the horses, but you underlined Nurania. What exes, sire? Said former champion, being the leading stud at Macewood Farm. The final choice is obvious, is it not? I suppressed a sigh. Everything was obvious once Holmes explained it. Having produced his surprise, which gave him joy, the sleuth switched to the matter at hand. His words, presumably directed at me, might well have been delivered to the walls in my absence. But I was a fixture, like the commonplace books and his voluminous files, a sounding board that he had become accustomed to. Chu San Fu has been positioned for me, and there is no undue activity in his lair, which means he hasn't heard, as yet, of our trip to Macewood. You think he has an information source in Surrey? If I read the signs right. 1. There was an intruder at Macewood. The ornamental lion's head gave us a corroborating clue there. 2. The nighttime visitor was not a robber, but a one-man survey team, getting the lay of the land as 'twere. 3. The Chinaman is after the sacred sword. Hold on! Occasionally I revelled in my role of Greek chorus, a fact that did not nettle Holmes. In fact, he welcomed it since it gave him the opportunity to test the steel of his reasoning. Your first two statements had a foundation of fact, but now are you not moving in a bit out on a limb? Do we know that this war that intrigues you so is not just a myth? Touche, Watson. We must visit Sir Randolph Rapp to secure an opinion. An expert one, I admitted to myself. Sir Randolph had figured in a previous adventure of Holmes's, and was the dernier cri to my way of thinking. One thing Rapp will mention is that most myths and folklore are not just flings of fancy. The Midas legend, for one, whatever other tales lost in time Holmes intended to cite, I did not learn, since there were sounds from without and he crossed to the door and flung it open. Filling the aperture was the robust form of Burlington Bertie. "Here we be, Gov. Might late, but I did my best. Ah, Bertie, do come in." As Holmes stood to one side, I fear my eyes must have of a sudden resembled saucers, for behind Bertie there was another figure. I'm sure it was an illusion, but when this apparition followed in Bertie's footsteps, it seemed that he had to step sidewise to make his way through our substantial doorway. He was no taller than Holmes, but his width dwarfed the burly Bertie. His hair, so blond as to be almost white, topped a round face devoid of wrinkles, with no traces of a beard. It was the face of a child set on a sturdy neck that terminated in a huge upper frame. He was, almost literally, as broad as tall. His legs were short, but had to be like the trunks of oak trees to support him. There was a smile seemingly painted on his face, and his wide blue eyes had a dreamy quality as though he had just awakened. I rose to my feet hurriedly and noted that Holmes was regarding our unusual visitor with a surprised look, as if wondering if the body was real and not carved by a woodworker, using Gog and Magog as models. "This here's Tiny," said Burlington Bertie. "I see," replied Holmes. I admired his sang-froid. "Do be seated, gentlemen." The humour of Lambeth and Limehouse, Chelsea and Croydon, is of a simple nature. How could this gargantuan be named anything but Tiny? I watched his progress into the room with alarm, trusting that our furniture would survive. Holmes directed traffic in such a manner that Tiny was aimed at our largest chair by the fire. "Tiny don't say much, but he's a good lad." "Quite," replied Holmes. "I can see that he would not need many words." The movements of the good lad fascinated me. They were delicate, as though he trod on eggs and manoeuvred in a doll's house. Of course, I thought, the poor chap had to be careful. An inadvertent gesture and he is liable to push down a wall. Tiny lowered himself into his designated chair in so fluid a manner that there was not even a creak. He sat with his hands placidly folded in his lap, his face slowly moving between Holmes, Bertie, and myself with interest, and his smile never wavered. "You said there might be some business, Mr. Holmes, so I brung the boy along to see if he'll pass muster." "He'll do just fine," replied my friend. Tiny was obviously listening and capable of understanding, for he started to rise, but was forestalled by a gesture from his companion. "There's more yet." As the giant resumed his seat, Bertie turned again to Holmes. "Like I says to you earlier, Mr. Holmes, there's not a sign that third bloke what I caved in on the docks when I hized myself back there t'other night." "You mentioned pursuing some leads," replied the sleuth, who had managed to drag his eyes away from Tiny. "I had in mind Blind Louis," The beggar. He lives not far from the docks, and what he didn't see ain't worth viewing. As though this required additional verification, Bertie turned toward me. Sharpest eyes between your and Lamb's eye, Doctor. Blind Louis. That's right. I had me a good idea for Blind Louis was coming home, but the time of the fracas what he seen. He's got the end of that white cane of his weighted, as was going things under control. Anyways, after I leaves, Blind Louis is thinking about getting on the deck to see if the cove I coshed ain't got a few pence what he don't need. But Louis is cautious. Yes, and a good thing, for some Chinks comes and picks up the body and carts him away. Now, Louis don't know who the Chinks is, but he figures maybe the boyo I caught is Sidney Putz. Holmes shook his head, disclaiming knowledge of this sinister citizen. Me neither, Mr. Holmes, but Louis says Putz used to work for Weissman, the usurer, and that's all I could dig up. A good job, Bertie. My friend was crossing to the desk again as he spoke. We'll see if we can learn more of Sidney Putz. Meanwhile, I'm expecting some action, and I want you and Ty to be on call. Holmes secured more notes from the cash drawer and passed them to Bertie. I don't know what is involved, but I'll get a message to you at the usual place. Righto, Mr. Holmes. Whatever the caper, you just do the thinking and Tiny and me will make out. Of that I'm sure, stated Holmes with deep-seated conviction. Fascinated, we both watched Bertie and Tiny depart. I sank back in my chair and mopped my forehead with Irish linen. Really, Holmes, never is life dull at 221B Baker Street. How fortunate for us. Keep us young, you know. He did have the good grace not to let the matter drop at that. As you gathered, I spoke to Bertie earlier. Almost as an afterthought, I recalled those two giant Manchurians we came in contact with once before, followers of Chu Sanfu. Now Bertie is no midget, so I asked him if he could locate another good man in a brawl. I would say, I answered, that Bertie fitted the bill.